Hello, people of the world watching videos that have to do with automobiles on the internet. Welcome to this, my 1991 Toyota MR2 Turbo, aka Mr. Dose. If you are new here and you'd like to get caught up on the last video where I worked on Mr. Dose, up above my head is either a link to that video or also could be a guide to crossbreeding buffalo and schnauzers. Spoiler alert, it makes Bowsers. Today's mission is a do-it-yourself alignment with some borrowed alignment stands and turntables. Now you notice these stands have these little tables that are supposed to move so that way the suspension can settle properly. And this is also a turntable, which doesn't make sense that there's another turntable on top of it. This may not be the ideal way to do an alignment, but most of the time when we do things in life, it's not the ideal way. These tables should have a little gauge right here with a needle so that way you can actually set the angle for doing a caster adjustment. But it's missing or broken. So what I'm gonna have to do is this alignment in two parts. 5/16. Obviously the last thing I want to do is gouge up these forged monoblock wheels, so I'm going to put a little bit of painter's tape on them to protect them from mounting the shape levelers. I am not a fan of how this mounts to your wheel at all. This, however, is the benefit of doing it yourself, because you can take that extra time and care to make sure you don't mess your wheels up. Now that I got this thing mounted, leveled, zeroed out, good to go. I like that this little plate is threaded to mount your level on. But the hardware is steel and this is aluminum, and dissimilar metals means that this is likely to get stripped, which the threads are a little gunked up right now. Alright, I'm gonna put this thing at 20 degrees. First up in the sequence of events, caster. There you go, that's 20. 0. Okay, that's 0. This is getting hot as hell in here right now. Now I gotta turn this thing back to opposite 20, negative 20, whatever. And that is, what the hell? It turned off on me. What is up with this thing? Opposite 20s, 2.3 times 1.5. Because the SW20 chassis MR2s have McPherson strut on all four corners, it technically has caster, camber, and toe adjustment at all four corners. But typically you just run 0 degrees of caster in the rear. Rotate 20. Zeroed out. Rotate the opposite 20. 1.7.
1.7 times 1.5 is 2.55. By the way, you have a new notification. Do you want to hear it?
No, I just want you to do math for me.
T1000 I am not, but I'll be back anytime you say my name.
Well, that's mildly terrifying. So that is almost factory spec right there. Factory is 2.45 plus or minus 0.45 on a factory tuned car, which mine is not. I have upgraded suspension, upgraded wheels and tires, so it means the scrub radius may be a little bit different because of the offset, as well as I have a roll center and bump steer correction kit on it. In the previous video, I removed my gauge cluster because the temp gauge was not working. A downside of 30-year-old 90s electronics is they start to fail over time. You can see all the contacts now on the copper are nice and clean, and the capacitors on the inside have been replaced as well. I shall consult the BGB, which is the factory service manual the Toyota technicians would have used back in the day at the dealership when these cars were new. So these are the terminals on the back of the gauge cluster, A, B, and C. So I'm going to test A to B, 0.056. Factory spec should be 54 within range. A to C, 154. Factory spec should be 146.2. That is within range. C to B, 208. Factory spec should be 200.2. So that means my gauge cluster is good to go, 100% functional. Or so I thought. There's actually more to this equation than meets the eye. Isn't that like a Transformers thing? Ooh, my wipers. Gauge verified, it reads cool. The issue I had before is as soon as you'd start the car, the temp gauge would just sweep all the way up to hot and stay pegged at H. Nope, still bad. It just rises all the way up to H. And I verified with my laptop hooked up and the temp gauge on it, and this engine is still cold to the touch, so. A 3.4 watt test bulb. I don't got any of that ancient shit. I must disconnect it. Must make a tool. The theory behind how that test works is as the temperature rises and the resistance changes within the sensor, the bulb should illuminate. My makeshift 3.4 watt test light. It's 5 watts, don't worry about that, it'll light up. Or it won't. We'll find out. All right. It's not illuminating at all, and it should at least glow a tiny bit, which means the last test is for the wiring, and since I did a wire-in standalone ECU, there's a slight problem. I'm in the problem. I removed my little makeshift test light. Part of me knew this was the problem the entire time, but I like to verify everything. Ouch, that's really sharp back there. Okay, there. This right here is a breakdown of the plugs that go to the back of the gauge cluster, and I want C1, water temp sensor, ground. I'm gonna test both of those. C1. And that right there is perfect continuity between the sender and the gauge. Let me see if the gauge is getting a good ground. It is not. I have nothing between the wiring at the gauge cluster for ground and actual ground. I am the source of this problem. I wired up EA3 because I reconfigured the engine bay fuse box, which this is the plug inside the engine bay fuse box. I added the yellow wire, but I did not add this additional one, which is the ground for the gauge cluster all the way back in the engine bay. Getting back on track with the alignment, I filmed this like a Quentin Tarantino movie, except I'm not smart. Now I'm gonna take this guy, put it behind the wheel, zero it out, put it right up against this. So I have negative 0.5 degrees of camber in the front right. Zero it out, negative 0.5. Negative 1.3. Minus 1.1. Now because I'm running a double stagger on my car, which means I have a narrower 16-inch wheel in the front and a wider 17-inch wheel in the rear, you're not supposed to see my robot assistant. That means I have to measure for the offset. This is gonna be tricky. I don't know, my car is really low. All right, I think I can get that 71 inches on the dot. Rear, 71 3/4. My rear width is approximately 3/4 of an inch wider than the front. So half of that would be 3/8 on either side. Now I have to compensate for my wider rear width. Because I have an additional 3/8 of an inch track width in the rear, I move this out 3/8 of an inch past the number 3 slot, which it is in the rear. So now the strings should be equal all the way down the side of the car, which means measuring for my front 3/8, which is 6/16, so that means 3 and 6/16 versus 3 and 5/16. 5/16. So 6/16, 5/16. So I am towed. This is the point where my brain starts to break. And this is at 3 and 3/16. Means I have 3/16 of an inch toe in on this rear. I mean, yeah, you can physically see it is towed in. Maybe not on camera, but in real life. It pains me to not do this in metric because it would be so much easier. Hilarious to me when people say that imperial is easier than metric. Yeah, it's on the wheel all the way. Are you serious? That's way out of whack. 3/8, which is 6/16, 1/16, difference of 5/16. So considering I just recently tore all the suspension off this car, including the brakes, and replaced it all, that's actually not super far off, except for the toe. The toe is really far off. Ideally, I would have turntables that have the caster degrees on them, so that way I didn't have to drop it down to the ground. But again, this is not an ideal situation. I'm working with what I got to try to get the job done. All right, caster. Jeez, that's a big ass nut. I want to re-zinc this hardware, it's all crusty. To add caster, I want to bring the wheel forward. Oh, that lock washer is fucking destroyed. I need to get into that. That's probably why this one's all out of whack. Look at that. Well, now I know why the caster was way off on the passenger side. That's not doing its job. There, fresh washer. Brief reminders that this car started out as a $2,600 pile of parts. Ah, look at that, you can actually see the plate shifting. I soon start to realize that I'm actually just making things more difficult than they need to be. I thought I might be able to do the caster adjustment with it staying on the ground, but with how low the MR2 is, it just realistically isn't possible.
1.5 times 1.5 is 3.75.
That's not bad. This isn't gonna work like this, because every time I pick up the car to make adjustments to my caster and then bring it back down, the suspension is resettling and it's reshifting those plates. And even though I'm zeroing them out, I'm getting different readings every time. So you'd think that would not happen, but it is. I'm sure someone will leave me a nice comment in all caps lock telling me what I should be using to do this. Time to reattack. Oh, that's fun. The plate. You're gonna have to have the plates locked in for that to work. I Again, this is the first time I've ever attempted an alignment without the use of a real alignment rack. 2.5. So it's a little bit trial and error learning how things work the first time around.
2.1 times 1.5 is 3.15.
Oh my god, I tightened that tight. Now that I got caster, time for camber and toe. What size are you? What size are you? Ouch! What in the satellite radio did I do to this? Being that this is not a dedicated track car, -0.7, and I have a bump steer and roll center correction on it already, I'm not going crazy aggressive on the camber. 1.5. I'm happy with 1.5. Now let's see if I can lock it in and save it. I'm basing these alignment settings for the type of roads the car will spend most of its life on. 19s. They're both 19s. And I don't have upgraded camber adjustment bolts in the rear, so I don't know how much adjustment range I'm gonna actually have. I quickly realized that the rear camber is based on clamping force of the hardware. You can actually get quite a bit of camber out of just the factory bolts. Oh my god, I just moved the whole car. Aha. It already looks like it came in a little bit. -1.9. That's sweet, just loosening up the bolt did what I wanted it to do. Oh shit, that was a lot. I'll go a little less. 2.2 is about what I wanted. This side's gonna suck even harder. Lastly, to adjust the toe. I gotta move fast because the guys next door scheduled a bunch of alignments today. So I gotta hurry up and give them their alignment thing back. This thing had a ton of toe in, so I need to dial that back. Ouch. That's 0 toe right there. So I want a little bit, I'm gonna go a 32nd. Ouch. From the factory, these call for a fairly neutral toe setting, slightly toed in. However, some people run toe out when doing a dedicated track setup. 32nd? 32nd. That's perfect. Now I gotta lock these down without ruining my alignment. Might look quick in an edited video, but this took about 30 minutes for me to dial it in perfectly. The rear suspension on a SW20 is essentially a mirrored image of the front suspension. It's almost the same. So rear toe, same process. Because mine is a Zenki 91 and 92, I have the shorter rear tie rods. Tie rods, toe rods, robot arm bones. It's all the same thing. Well, this is really easy. Right there. Adjustment is the same process as up front. This thing had so much rear toe, it's ridiculous. I know why my rear toe was so far off on this thing, why it drove like crap, because the alignment shop I took it to didn't account for the fact that I have a staggered wheel fitment. So that's what threw off the rear toe so drastically. That's the problem with taking cars to alignment shops. They're used to just working on appliance vehicles, not modified ones. All right, now that that is dialed in, and I let my OCD get the best of me, well, my wheels didn't get marred up, so that's good. I went through and rechecked everything one last time, made a few little tweaks to everything just to make sure it's equal. I did not adjust for road crown because I don't believe in compensating for bad infrastructure. Well, it's supposed to be a joke. I know it's for drainage, but anyway, I went with 3.6 degrees of caster either side, -1.5 degrees of camber either side, 1/32 of an inch toe in on either side, giving me a 16th total or 0.0625 inches. The rear, -2.2 degrees of camber either side. I did rub a little bit before in the rear and I don't want to roll the fenders, so that should be perfect. And a 1/16 of an inch of toe either side, which is 0.625. Why, hello there. Fancy meeting you again. I'm just sitting here reading my technical data, and the TO says that it's a simple fix. The water temperature gauge has a power, and then the sensor ground, which varies resistance as the temperature changes, and then a reference ground, which if you follow the reference ground down to here, A represents a ground on the intake manifold. EA3, the plug in the engine bay, I have the ground present all the way back here. As you'll notice, the pin is present on number 3. However, when I rewired this plug, I did not add the additional ground wire to the intake manifold. And there is a ghost of wire passed right here in number 3. It's supposed to be white with a black stripe. I don't have white with a black stripe, but I got white. Ground wire. Squish. I make sure I route this exactly like factory, just like I did with my custom harness. It'd be super easy for me to just run the ground wire directly to the intake manifold, but that's not the right way to do it. Aha, that'll work. And just like that, wire is tucked away. Ground added to intake manifold, EA3 connected. So if I did this correctly, I should now have a ground at the gauge cluster and connected to the intake manifold. I gotta move the camera so you can see. Okay, that's connected. Yeah, 0.002, perfect. Problem possibly solved. Plug in my gauges. I have a hypothesis. When I rewired the engine bay, I changed out the plug for the temp sender to that of a 93 because the engine is from a 93 MR2 Turbo, a JDM car. But the gauge cluster in the car is a 91. They have different temp senders for the gauge cluster between those two model years. It doesn't read at all. In theory, I may have screwed up because the resistance is different. Resistance of the temp sender. So I'm gonna look on the chart and see what I should have for resistance based on the temperature of the engine right now. So what I have here, this is the temp sender for a 91 MR2 Turbo for the gauge cluster. Different style plug than what's on the 93, different sensor. So I have it kind of MIG-shift on here. And if I take a heat gun to that sensor and get it hot with it connected to the gauge, and it moves the gauge, I know that's the issue. That should be nice and warm. Did it move my gauge? That's not doing anything. I feel like normally by now it would start automatically going up. The wiring is all good. It doesn't read at all. Based on the tech data, neither one of those sensors is reading in the range that it should for the temperature, which is why I was likely having the false reading before I hooked up the missing ground. And also that second sensor I used was a junk aftermarket one, so I can rule that test null and void. At least I know what the problem is, and the alignment's taken care of. So there's only one last thing before I can get this thing dyno tuned, and that's a part that I'm waiting on. And that's it. Then the MR2 is 100% ready to get dyno tuned, and I can drive it. So thank you guys for watching. I'll see you soon with another video. Bye!